in an interesting mood for this episode of the podcast. I got to say the shirts.
Our shirts threw us off.
So bad.
But even before we started recording, you both just gave each other a look like, sup. Sup.
It's been a while since we hung out.
I know. I haven't been sitting next to Amie for quite a while, so we'll see how this goes today, Crockett. No promises.
That's the spirit. I'll try to keep the ship on the water, ladies. Here we go. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast, brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network with Jody, McCloud, Missmer, and Amie, Allanson, Dundon. You can find this podcast at sluhn.org, on YouTube, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. All that good stuff. Ladies, it has been a little while. Welcome back to both of you. We all plan different color shirts. So right off the bat, we're in good motion together. So we wanted to get into a conversation this time around that can certainly be a difficult one to have. And not only one to certainly if you're experiencing some of these feelings yourself, but also maybe if you're seeing someone that is close to you, near and dear to your heart, that is maybe contemplating self-harm, self-mutilation. So we just kind of wanted to go into that topic a little bit today, because certainly it's one that can be hard to broach if you're a person who's maybe seeing these symptoms in somebody. And certainly if you are feeling some of these symptoms, could be very, very difficult to try to get those feelings off of your chest in a way to kind of help you take some positive steps forward. So I'm going to start, Amie, with you on this one here. What are some early signs that maybe we could see in another person that suggests maybe this is going down a difficult path for somebody?
Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
So there are a whole lot of warning signs, actually. A lot of people will say that, you really don't know when someone is self-harming, but there actually are a lot of warning signs. And we see, we call self-harm NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. And we see non-suicidal self-injury signs more often in our younger people than we do in our adults. So when I think about, and when I say younger people, we see it as young as 10 years old. We're really looking for symptoms of depression, isolation, sadness, hopelessness. We're looking for anxiety. We're looking for panic attacks, fears, worries, and we're really looking for things that are odd or off about the person we're concerned about perhaps in their dress, right? Maybe they're wearing long sleeves or wearing long pants at a time of the year when that's not typical for them, or when it's not typical ever for them, trying to cover up scars or burns or marks. So layers of clothing, covering of the torso, of the thighs, of the wrists, of the hands, of the arms. Definitely pretty overt signs. Also, maybe things missing in the home that are sharp, or things that are carved that are not, or pocket knife carvings. For example, popsicle sticks being carved into a point. Those kind of things are some signs.
Yeah, I think that the non-suicidal piece is really important, because having been a crisis worker in an emergency department, Crockett, I can tell you that there were many times I was having conversations with family members or with physicians to explain that this individual was not trying to cause death. As a matter of fact, a lot of individuals who self-harm will describe that it's actually the opposite. It's trying to feel alive. It's to take away the numbing that they're feeling because of something. It's not to say that there aren't individuals who take it a little bit too far and they put themselves at risk. That certainly happens, and it can happen, but it's not the intention to die. It's the intention to feel alive, to feel something. And it is deliberate, though. I mean, that's the definition. It's the deliberate destruction of body tissue.
Yes, and it's almost never a deliberate intention to suicide.
Right.
So I think people need to remember that non-suicidal self-injury isn't about suicide attempt or trying to die. Like Jody said, unfortunately, it can sometimes unintentionally go too far, the self-injury piece, and it could land people in the hospital or unfortunately even dead.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess a question that I would say is, so as I'll start with as a parent, if I were to see some of these signs in my child, and Jody, to your point, maybe they said that their whole path was not necessarily uh, anything beyond a little bit of self harm to feel alive. How do you kind of have a conversation beyond like this isn't okay, and what kind of steps can you take to maybe help them get beyond this path that they're on?
Everybody copes differently,
Sure.
and this is coping. So I don't know that it's a conversation as a parent or a loved one, because adults do this. This isn't,
Sure.
Amie mentioned it predominantly lives in that, 10 to 14 year range when it kind of kicks up and you start to see those pieces, but adults do it too. But it's coping. So it's finding out what they're trying to cope with, what's happening, and what is happening internally that they feel that this is the way to cope, is to self-harm. It's I actually had a 15-year-old girl in one of my acute partials, and I asked her why she did it. And she said, it releases everything that I feel inside of me in a way that I can't talk about. It's this release. But what I've learned from folks like Amie is that they start to associate that harm with relief. And that's when it starts to become something that happens on a regular basis. But it was interesting to hear her say that, where I would have thought it hurt. Like, that looks like it hurt. To her, it created relief. So I would say, if you are seeing someone, or you have a child or spouse who's doing this, it's finding out what started it and what happened and why this is how they cope. I think it goes pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I think typically to a person, when you mention that someone may be experiencing self-harm or self-mutilation, their first thought is that it's probably correlated with some kind of negative feelings. Like you keep using the word cope. In your experience, I'm sure you've seen a lot of people from a lot of different avenues. What if it's not? What if it's not this kind of guilt or shame or negative thing that they're feeling? It's really just this gives me a rush that I can't find anywhere else. That it's not I'm coping with this maybe negative thing from my past. That it's literally just this is just something that makes me feel alive.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Amie take that one.
And that happens, right? And you will often hear people say when they self-injure that the sight of the blood when they cut, or the sight of the wound when they burn, is very is very much a rush, because it completely lets them focus on that and not on the things that are bothering them, or all the things that they may be worried about, or traumas that they may be unable to escape. So in that way, in my practice, I very much treat it, and this is, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to follow it by something else. I very much treat non-suicidal self-injury as addiction and eating disorder. And that's it's becoming more and more popular among how we treat and work with folks that have the self-harm. What we know about there's potentially significant commonality between NSSI and eating disorders, which are present in as many as 55% of those who self-injure. Interesting, right? So over half of people who self-injure have some sort of eating disorder. And that doesn't surprise me.
No.
I don't think it surprises you either,
Mm-mm.
because we know that eating disorders, depending on the severity of and the type of eating disorder, are very much about self-deprivation or self-flogging, for lack of a better term. And addiction is looking for that next rush, looking for that next high. Cutting is a way to find that release, a way to find that escape. It's all very much interrelated.
I would say too that self-harm or cutting, it's not related to something that's socially sanctioned. So it's not about your kid getting a nose piercing and they opted for pain to get a piercing. No, they opted to get a piercing, and sorry, Dad, but that's what happened. So it's not socially sanctioned destruction of tissue. It's very different than, oh, I just do this because it gives me a rush. That needs to be looked at. Like that's an individual who does that. If it's not a socially sanctioned piece, you still need to look into it. The person might be saying, no, everything's fine. I just like to do this. Step back for a minute and look at the behavior that's happening. Use the example of eating disorders. People can justify what they're doing or not doing, or eating or not eating, but step back for a minute. And is it healthy? So I think you just have to be aware of that piece.
Yeah.
When I'm interested in this topic in particular, because, I think when you look at maybe that 10 to 14 year bracket that you had mentioned, Amie, it's a delicate one. Certainly in a world of social media, I think we've used the term before. I call it a highlight reel. You see everybody's best ofs when you go on social media. And I think even more in, recently there have been some shows or movies that have kind of highlighted the idea of self-harm. I guess the question is, if, for a kid that young, if they're not seeing it, how often do you guys see them kind of stumbling into these experiences on their own, versus maybe if you get to the core of where it started for them was seeing something or reading something or something in, we'll just say, pop culture, kind of leading them down this path of experimentation, versus, you might have just fallen off your bike one time and skinned your knee and thought, whoa, that's given me some kind of something to feel. So I guess that's kind of the question. How much of the outside influence maybe influences some of your decisions for, say, self-harm or self-mutilation?
Can I jump on this
Go
one?
ahead.
That is such a controversial statement, what you just said. And I love it because I have this conversation with my 21-year-old. You look at the new shows that are out there and we have this conversation. Well, it's the show that gave them the idea. If they hadn't seen that never would have happened. And it's such a controversial statement because how do you know that, first of all? And if you watch that show and you don't do it, you just kind of negated the whole theory of, if somebody sees it, they're going to get the idea and they're going to do it and they're going to try it. So I think that's very controversial. That came out with 13 Reasons Why. That's out right now with Euphoria. There are all these conversations that are happening right now. When you talk to that age group, they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like Euphoria makes me not even want to take Tylenol, let alone, do something else, like, for goodness sakes. But, and same thing with 13 Reasons Why, as a parent, when it first came out, God, our kids would have been like 18, 19-ish, something like that. And I kind of thought the same thing, but my other brain took over and going, no. That's, in my opinion, that's not quite how that works. And so clinically, I don't know where you stand on that, but that's such, Crockett, what you just said, a lot of people believe.
Sure.
Go back to the 80s when Ozzy Osbourne was creating all kinds of satanic violence, right? And I'm not suggesting you're talking about the same thing, but it's the same controversial kind of conversation.
Sure.
But that's where I stand. I don't, Amie, where you are with that.
Well, I think even so much just I mean, look, we're calling people social media influencers now. That word influence can kind of come from anywhere in pop culture. Amie, go ahead. I'll let you jump in.
You're right. And you're right, Crockett. It's the influence is a thing, right? Peer pressure is a thing.
Right.
We've had peer pressure since the dawn of time. We've had peer pressure since the Bible. It goes all the way back. But social media, what I think it does is brings out our character, good character stuff and more negative character flaws in our own personalities, right? If I'm watching a TikTok stream and somebody is doing something that is maybe socially not accepted, I have the choice to not go out and do that if it's robbing the next door neighbor or if it's whatever it is.
Your neighbor's really happy to hear that right now.
Absolutely, they are. I know. But
and you just got unfollowed on TikTok for that.
Yeah, there you go. Amie and that TikTok.
I know. Me and my TikTok. I gotta stop
it's out of
that.
control. You don't have TikTok.
I do not.
No. Okay.
I got a clock. That TikTok. That's about it. Yeah.
There you go. I was going somewhere with that. And
you have a choice when you
do.
see something like that.
Right. You do have a choice. But so take our kiddos, 10, 15, 20 years old with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, trauma. They may not have as much of a choice.
Now insert influencer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Right. So if I have depression or I have I suffer from bipolar disorder, and I'm watching social media streams that are like, that's kind of interesting. And if I do that, maybe I'll have friends, or maybe I'll fit in, or maybe XYZ. Then, Crockett, I think that's where your point comes in.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right, Amie, but it's not even the chicken or egg theory necessarily. Not to say that some people who aren't more inclined to taking risks or entering into something, but there's a larger group of individuals who are watching those shows, who are seeing these influencers, who also make a choice to not. So I love how you said that, Amie. It's take individuals who already are experiencing anxiety, depression, that trauma, right? I mean, that's not even something we touched on. We know that individuals who experience or have experienced trauma, we will see self-injurious behavior in individuals who've experienced some sort of trauma in their life as well. So yeah, it's tough. I think that you need to make sure, I think that's where monitoring your children's consumption of social media and television is very important. I think it's important to know where your children are before you open up that social media gate, and then you pay attention to it. You don't just hand them the device and say, go to it. I think that monitoring needs to happen, because then you need to have a conversation. Wow, what do you think about that? I had the same thought. Oh, maybe it's not the same thought, Crockett, I don't want to assume, but I had the thought that certain shows were making my child feel a certain way. And when I actually had the conversation with my child, I learned from her that my perception was completely off, but at least I had the conversation.
Sure. I think that's a fascinating point that you make, because I find myself, my daughter's only 6, so we've got a lot of hurdles to clear, certainly at her age. But even so, I'll have conversations with her about maybe something that scared her or made her uncomfortable. And maybe I thought, oh my gosh, is this now like a core memory? She's never going to want to do X, Y, or Z. And then I might bring it up because something reminds me of that situation. And she'll just kind of be like, Dad, what the heck are you talking about? So it is just, it's fascinating trying to look as a parent. I think your job is to be as involved as you can. The hard part about being a parent too, is you kind of got to let them scrape those knees like we were talking about earlier. So I think it really is about finding a balance with your kids. And we mentioned the kiddos here. Certainly this doesn't just affect people between the ages of 10 to 14. So
Yeah.
when it comes to adults in this situation, I'm sure both of you ladies have had plenty of conversations with adults well beyond 14, 18, 21 years old. Amie, I'll kind of start with you. How do you find people ending up talking to you that are beyond that kind of teenage, maybe, I don't want to put them all in this basket, but that kind of experimental basket a little bit, people that maybe have a little bit more life experience that are, participating, for a lack of a better word, in self-harm or self-mutilation?
Yeah. We definitely see it trickle off as people get older in terms of the actual physical behavior of the self-harm. I believe it's 1 in 5 college students who are aging out of college and then into young adulthood admit to a history of at least once some sort of self-injury. So that's 20% of adults walking around that will admit to past self-harm. So it's probably closer to 25% would be my guess.
That's actually the exact number that I have. It is 1 in 5, and
Okay.
we can tag the study.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
But so the adults that I've met with, generally in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who are coming in saying, yeah, when I was younger, I would cut, and then proceed to pull up sleeves or pull up pant legs or pull up shirts to show their belly scars. And oftentimes it's whole limbs full of scars of cuts from whatever they could find to cut at the time.
Under the breasts, very
Yes.
common for females because of the shame that comes with that. We talk about feeling shame or being shamed. This is kind of the last dark place that people need to acknowledge and come forward with. And you very rarely hear, and I'm not familiar with any, famous, we've talked before about athletes coming out. I'm not familiar with anybody kind of coming out with this. And I certainly wouldn't want to say any names of people I suspect or I've heard, but it's kind of that last taboo shamed element. And so it's hidden for
Although
a long time.
there are some, even around in Eastern Pennsylvania, there's some pretty famous tattoo parlors that actually advertise for covering up cars from self-harm.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So, and so they're, and I know that because of the adults that I've treated that are at the point where I need to get this made into something beautiful. And so there's that society out there where, this is where the societally acceptable tattooing and piercing comes in. And there are a lot of really great people out there who are coming in saying, okay, come in with all of your scars and let's make it something beautiful. So we're doing more of that these days.
Wow.
And because when people do come in to see me as an adult, it's usually about the shame. It's not about the need to self-cut anymore. It's about the fact that I can't wear shorts around my kids. I don't want them to see that I did this, or I can't, so then where it does often show up are our plastic surgeons offices later in life as people try to get these scars covered up to help people, to help them forget about it by not having to see it. But then we bring up the point of, so if we're just covering this up physically, then we continue to cover it up emotionally. And if we still don't talk about it, there were zero research studies on self-injury in the world of psychiatry until the mid-1980s.
Yeah.
So we can't even go back to old research because nothing was ever done.
Yeah, and when you talk to individuals, from what I understand, there was another study that was done that talked about why do you stop? And one of the reasons, there were a lot of reasons that people indicated, but there were 4 top reasons. And one of those top 4 reasons was I grew out of it. And the other was, which I thought was interesting, and the second was I met someone or had a relationship that made me feel worthy, that I understood my value in a relationship, and it had a lot to do with connection. And we can link that one too. I'll write that one down. But I thought that was interesting, that it had a lot to do with feeling worthy and finding value externally.
And isn't that funny? Because we were just talking about TikTok and social media and imitation. And for those very reasons, your younger people cut to find connection. Oh, I found somebody I connected with. We're going to cut together.
Yeah.
We had in a school district in Pennsylvania, not in the distant past. There are things that happen for our kiddos that end up being self-harm or self-injury pacts, where people will cut together, and it's more of a belonging thing than it is at all a suicidal thing.
Yeah, when someone finds
People.
other people.
Yeah.
But the injury itself, that generated self-injury of that release and those elements, going back to what you said before, something was happening first. There was some depression, there was some anxiety, there was some
They may not know it.
stress.
No one may have ever identified it.
Right.
But sure, it can for some people, it can start with something as simple as a learning disability.
Mm-hmm.
And feeling, well, I shouldn't say simple, because what we find is that the largest population of kids who self-injure are ones with a history of being bullied. So those kids, whether maybe somebody had a speech impediment or a developmental delay, or for whatever reason, or were a little overweight, and that bullying starts, those are the kids that then turn inward. Some of the time. There are lots of resilient people out there. So
Sure.
What I don't want to say is that everybody's cutting. I don't mean that at all. But, it's those kids that just aren't real sure of themselves to begin with, maybe have some past trauma, and then a bully, for whatever reason, targets them. And those are kids we really have to keep an eye on. So, but way back full circle, Crockett, when you said, what do we have to look for? If your child is talking about being bullied at school, not having friends, or not being picked to play a game on the playground, it's important to not just say, suck it up, buttercup. We all deal with stuff,
You've got to validate that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which I'm learning about. But you have to you have to validate that. It's not, oh, that kids will be kids. Oh, yep, that happened to me. Kids will be kids. Get over it. You have to validate it and have that conversation and find out how they're feeling about it. Even if it's just a quick mark, like, how'd that make you feel?
Yeah.
Well, they're stupid. Okay.
Right. Yeah, you're probably right. No, I'm just kidding. But
validate that too.
Yeah. So I love, we've talked about a couple of different links, and we'll certainly put those in the podcast here. So we'll come back to that parent child age here, that kind of 10 to 14-year-old. If you feel like maybe your child or your sibling or whoever it might be that's close to you is maybe falling in this category of self-harm or self-mutilation, what particular places can people go? If there is an additional link that you guys, that comes right off the top of your head, certainly we'd love to hear about. But what are some good first avenues for people that are maybe looking to get some information that they can then share for people to go to?
First and foremost, if you think someone that is self-injuring, you want to encourage them. If they're over 18, you want to encourage them to go see their family doctor and get checked out. Because one of the things that we know that happens is that some of these wounds, because it is so secretive, can easily get very infected and can quickly turn into a physical problem. So the first thing we want to do is get that loved one or friend checked out by a doctor, and go in with them, be honest with the doctor and say, I think Jody may be cutting. I need you to check her entire body. Because as Jody was talking about, sometimes people are cutting in very sensitive places where we wouldn't necessarily look unless we were looking for that. So medical check is very first on my list.
Yeah, I would say that for a lot of the situations we've been talking about and continue to talk about, making sure your physical body is not impacted or causing the feelings that you're feeling. So yeah, that hands down first step. pediatrician, family doctor, who your PCP, you need to get there first.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Yeah, and then I would say it would be psychotherapy, counseling. Depending on the severity of the mental health issues, there's lots of different levels of care for treatment. So finding a therapist, finding a counselor, getting that person evaluated, and then taking it from there.
I think educating yourself too. I think as a parent, as a spouse, as a boyfriend, a girlfriend, you need to educate yourself too on what it actually is, rather than what it isn't, which is it is non-suicidal behavior.
Right.
I think to borrow a phrase you said earlier, where you said, "Suck it up, buttercup." I think that's probably a phrase that we should kick to the curb on most things. Certainly when it comes to anybody that's close to us, because sometimes it may just be something as simple as giving an ear and having a conversation, whether it's empathy or sympathy, whatever you can do to try to help with someone, and trying to understand what they might be feeling in any given moment could be very important and vital to them moving forward. And certainly just in that moment, it could be a moment of need for sure. Well,
absolutely.
Amie, Jody, this has been a great conversation. I'd certainly want to encourage people to check out the links. We're going to have those posted to kind of give yourselves a little bit more information on some of the stuff that we talked about in this episode. Definitely an enlightening episode for sure, ladies. I thank you both very much. That's Jody McCloud Missmer and Amie Allanson Dundon. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast, brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. You can find this podcast at sluhn.org. Shareable links right there on YouTube. You can Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, audio, video versions. Both available if this is a conversation that you certainly want to share with someone close to you. Jody, Amie, always a pleasure, my friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you.